3, 2.
Good morning and welcome to Write with Courage. I am Victoria Sullivan. As you can see, Brittany King. It's been a long week already. Brittany Ping is not with me today. She is on a well-deserved break. She is spending time with her family. And my special co-host here is my son, Seamus. Want to say hi to the folks?
Hello.
And Seamus and I were having a conversation the other day about education and the role that philosophy plays in education and the importance of classical education. And I thought that the topic was very interesting. I was impressed with the amount of knowledge that he had on the subject and what he brought to it. So we decided to make education and philosophy and classical education the topic for today. Next week, we will go back to politics. I will have Tammy Simmons, Garthwaite, on with me. Brittany will still be away. We are going to talk about Pork Fest and RFK Jr.'s appearance there. I heard it was very interesting. He impressed a lot of people, so we're going to talk about that. Yesterday, I just want to give a shout out to the New Hampshire Federation of Republican Women, because yesterday they hosted Donald Trump at our annual Lilac Luncheon. It was the 76th annual luncheon. He is the fourth former president to attend and be the special guest there, but the way that they managed such a big event, it was sold out. There were over 400 people there, dealing with all of the security that we had to deal with and the other things that come along with a large event with such a high profile figure. They really did a great job managing it. So I just want to give a shout out to them and thank you all for your support of our organization. And now we're going to turn off the politics for the day, and we're going to turn to education. So this conversation that we were having was actually inspired by our conversation about his school, which is Holy Family Academy, which we are fortunate and blessed to attend because of the Children's Scholarship Fund and the EFA accounts. So we thought it would be fun to bring in the principal. I know fun and principal doesn't usually go together, but once you meet this man, you're going to understand. So it would be fun to bring in his principal, Mr. Mark Gillis. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, co-host Seamus.
So why don't you tell people a little bit about Holy Family and what you think separates it from other schools or other education?
Sure. So we're a Catholic classical school on the west side. So we're on the campus of St. Marie's. So we rent the Heavey School building, and right above CMC, and grades 7 through 12. And the model for the school is to keep it sort of village size. So we cap it at 20 kids per class. And the Catholic part is that sort of that we believe that we're all children of God. We're made to love it, to be loved. Our hearts are restless till they rest in God, and that we're supposed to love one another. So you don't have to be a Catholic to come, but we're clear about our Catholic identity. Classical school, you read the great books. So these are, as they say, the best that's been thought and said. So they go all the way back to the Romans and the Greeks. So these are the classics. And then we discuss them in seminar method or Socratic method. So in classes, you're not sitting in rows. Everyone's in the front row, as we say, and it's a discussion. So before class, you read the book, Shakespeare, St. Augustine, whatever it is, and you come in and the teacher is asking questions. We want to know what you think, and gives the students a chance to find their voice, to try to make an argument, to agree or disagree in a polite way, to listen carefully. And we have a core curriculum, meaning by that, this is the way everyone was educated, the way the Founding Fathers were educated, everyone until about 100 years ago, when education shifted to mainly job training, which is a good thing to have, but maybe not the most important thing for a human being. And where to be educated meant you read these classics and you had some familiarity with the great topics.
Right. So I know Seamus likes the good books. One reason that we sought out Holy Family Academy, he and my other son, Buddy, who just graduated from Trinity, were fighting for their value system every day in public school. They were fighting for their values. And so we wanted to find schools that they weren't fighting that every day and they could actually get an education, right? Like my older son did a great job formulating arguments against socialism for Spanish class, but never learned Spanish.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that these schools aligned with their values, and they chose different schools with the children's savings accounts. Seamus shadowed at your school, and he came out and said that was the best day I ever had in school. And we were like, we have to find a way to make this work. But we were laughing last week because when I met you probably don't remember because you meet so many parents, but when I met you and we spoke and we were talking about the school, you asked me, what are you looking for in an education for your child? Which I don't think anyone ever asked me when I was in a school before. And I said, I want him to be in a school that guides him to be the person that God intended him to be. Mm-hmm. Well, then he came home with the backpack, which it happens to be your school motto. Be the person God intended you to be. And I didn't know at the time. And I said, I think he probably thought that I was playing him. Like I said, all the things he wanted to hear. But it just was verification that your values aligned with what we were searching for.
Right.
And in a society right now where so many kids are struggling to find their value system, I think that schools like yours are much needed to help kids stay on a path where they find their identity through Jesus, and not their identity in the world where they're so lost right now.
Yeah, and faith and reason, the images that have two wings to learn the truth. And I think we're sort of maybe losing both. There may be a conversation about faith is seen as superstition and anti-science, and it's all about persecution of different people. That's a different conversation. But also reason really has been chucked aside, that you really can't know anything, that you really can't know the world, and reality is pretty much what you make it. And that's a new view. I mean, the history of our tradition is there is a reality to things, there's a nature to things, and we want to get in tune with that, and that's how we're happy. We can't just make up any rules of living and flourish any more than you can make up rules for what a tomato is and treat it any way you want and have it be healthy. So and then you talk about sort of the debating that happens, and it's a good thing, because that's how we learn. It's kind of a back and forth, and it should be done in a friendly way. I think sometimes we just see so much kind of nasty conversation. There's not much listening, and no one learns. So we try to learn the art of, let me hear what you think, let me understand what you think, let me maybe even be able to say it back to you, maybe even better than you could, which is St. Thomas Aquinas did. He say, well, is there a God? You say, no, there isn't. He'll make better arguments than anybody could that there is no God. And then you get really interested and say, wow, how are you going to answer that? So that's what we're trying to do. So that contact sport is a good thing if there's an understanding that there are some right answers, and not just a great Easter egg hunt, and there's no Easter egg. We're all just talking, and, and that's really not going to get anywhere.
Yep, so we went camping recently, and we brought some reading, and Seamus brought me the Thomas Aquinas book.
Okay.
I started reading that. So
camping, burn around the campfire, the marshmallows,
the
five groups.
easy conversation, light reading. And is that one of your favorites?
It's just one of the ones we read during the school. I got it for free, so I figured I'd put it.
Favorite books, free books.
What did you pull from that? What did you learn from that book?
The purpose of government. Now it's not really doing its job.
And how is it failing?
It's not tending to the common good as it should.
And how do you see that playing out? How does that need to change? Can we change it?
I think it is something that could be changed, but it would just be a long process.
So it's not going to happen in 2024?
No.
No?
Could I ask Seamus a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, more or less, what's the common good? Kind of a general understanding of the common good, not an exact definition.
Bringing people toward their nature for the sake of happiness.
Okay. All right. Yeah. How would you say? It's okay if I ask. I'm doing the teacher
100%.
thing here.
I'm going to slide this forward. Sorry, Brandon, if that made noise for you.
We're going
to go ahead.
Back to the campfire here, the ghost stories and the Aquinas. So, how's the common good different from, say, majority? So, 51% of the people want whatever. We're out to dress like clowns or whatever. Is the common good basically what we all decide, or is the common good a different thing?
The issue is that the majority is not really educated as they should be. You mentioned earlier the big shift from classical education to job training.
Yeah.
People don't learn philosophy in public school anymore. I'm pretty sure they used to, but they don't now.
Yeah.
So they don't really know what the highest good is.
Yeah.
They don't really know what they're pursuing when they vote.
Yeah. Okay. So, take an example, something like fresh air. Like, that's a good thing for everybody. That's not something that the more one group has that the other group doesn't have. So it's a common good, and that one thing human beings need to flourish. Some food and some basic. How we get there? Yeah, that's the debate. What's the best way to make sure we? How do you run businesses and have whatever, all that kind of stuff. So yeah. And how do you think that's different from majority? Can that change? We've all of a sudden decided that fresh air is not a good thing anymore. It's not part of the common good. We just decided against that. Just because we voted that or decide that, I don't know if it changes the fact that it's a good thing.
Right. So you'd find that through reason, not just through democracy. And reason is, I think, the biggest part of philosophy, right?
I have no further questions.
Oh, you guys are doing great. You don't need me today. No, but this is why I wanted to have you on, because I think it shows people at home that we now have education choice and freedom in New Hampshire more than we have before. Mm-hmm. It's still not absolute, but it's getting there. And when people are seeking out schools, your school is, would agree, is not suited for every child.
No school is.
Right? 20 people in a classroom is not what some kids are looking for.
Yeah.
But then you've got the public schools where you've got 30, 40 kids in a classroom, and that's not good for some kids. And the whole basis of education freedom is to find that school that is right for your child, based on the school's leadership and their values and their principles.
Right.
You as a leader are highly regarded by so many people. Like leadership is everything for a school, and I have so much respect for you, and hats off to you, the way that you've handled everything, including COVID, which was above and beyond what I saw in other places, especially the public schools. Like Manchester was one of the last districts to get their kids back in school, and now we're seeing the fallout of that. What it did to them emotionally and mentally and academically, it was very bad for them. And when you were navigating COVID, you had a meeting where you brought in parents, and we Zoomed it. But we brought it in, and I remember Miss Nesmazek, who was moved on to a different school now, but she was great, spoke about, we're leading your kids through faith and not fear. And that was everything I wanted to hear as a parent. Yes, we had to be cautious. We had to keep in mind that this was a serious situation. But you really brought parents into the conversation and did what you could to get kids back into school as soon as, because you are a no technology school. Basically.
I would say we want it to be our servant, not our master. So we use laptops as needed. And we put the cell phones away. Get 8 hours a day. You'll survive. You can still talk to human beings face to face, and it'll all be there at 3 o'clock, whatever you're missing.
So when you went to online, that was a huge shift for your school.
It was, yeah. As far as that goes, it was surprising, given that we had some teachers who were fantastic. And look, we had an advantage being smaller, so I sympathize with you have a huge school. It's a different situation, and so we were able to get up and running in 2 days. It was new to us, and we certainly got better at it as we went on. But that's it. We're small and nimble. Sort of a military unit that it's just easier to move around if you're dealing with 100 students and 20 teachers. So we did have some advantages, but so we made the best of it. But to your point of school's not for everybody. Absolutely, it's parents' choice. People have a few kids. This student is really going to flourish here. This one's there, and it's great to have that choice. It's not mass production. It's not a cookie cutter, and it's very personal. And students learn differently. Even you take your 20, it's a universe of how different students learn and talk. And some like to talk more, some talk less. It's not necessarily a virtue to talk too much. It's not necessarily a vice to talk little. So it's not who talks the most gets an A kind of thing. But again, the art of conversation. So it's a good point that parents are the primary educators, and they know best. It's great to have some options, no matter where you are in terms of your paychecks.
And I think a lot of parents feel like what you just said is parents are the primary educators. I think a lot of parents feel disenfranchised by education right now in a lot of ways, and that they are actually put on the back burner and told that there are kids when they're in that building, you have no rights, and it's even come from high up leadership. It's come from a recent court hearing in Manchester. I don't know if you're aware of that. That's being elevated to the Supreme Court because they came back and on a lower court said parents' rights are not absolute. So this is a conversation that's happening across the state. The parental rights bill was voted down, which shouldn't have even had to be a bill because parents are the teachers, the caregivers, the guidance of their children, and the fact that those rights are being questioned or even in some cases trampled on is very unnerving for a lot of parents. So to hear you say that, I know that is the philosophy of a lot of the Catholic schools, not private schools, and that's why people are turning to them and using the freedom accounts to pursue those.
Wholeheartedly agree. And it definitely needs to be a partnership, so the parents are their primary educators, and that's why they choose a school, because we have to work together, and the more the parents in the school are on the same page, the better it is. And as I say, we're not, we're all on the same team. We're all wearing the uniform, and it's Seamus is the name of the team, or each student. And so when things come up, because they'll come up, it's really great, and you can work through things. There could be disagreements, as long as we can talk, as long as we can get to know each other and work through it. And it is sort of a scary thought to think that these 5-year-olds don't come under the authority of their parents,
Right.
and their parents. So that's pretty scary stuff. Yeah.
And every morning I see you out there. I know Mr. Gadecki at Trinity did the same thing.
Yeah.
Stood outside, greeted all of the kids as they came in. You're accessible to parents that way. And if you can't be there, then someone, another teacher
Right.
is out there greeting people.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important that parents see that you are the face of the school. The kids see, you greet them in the morning, give them a high five, welcome, and you just start their day off right. And when it comes to the Socratic method, we have to, as parents, remind ourselves sometimes that Seamus isn't arguing with us. He's presenting a different point of view. And the other night we were talking about, he was talking, he's 16, he's getting his license, he wants to get a job. And I said, we really need to concentrate on education first. Like, that is the first. You've got plenty of time for a job, and the other thing is education first. And then do you want to present your argument?
No.
He said,
Not arguing, I'm presenting another view.
he said, but isn't the purpose of education to be able to be employed? And as parents, we were like, your education is and then I had to sit back and go, okay, he's not actually arguing with us. He's presenting a viewpoint of
Right. Dad thought that I was saying I shouldn't be going to high school.
Right. My husband, his first thought was protection, right?
Yeah, sure.
You can't not go to high school. And he's like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just
Yeah.
presenting. And then when I sat back and I listened to what he was saying, I'm like, okay, no, that was our instinct as parents to jump
Sure.
in and guide, right, and protect. But what he's saying is a very philosophical way
Sure.
to look at that. And that's sort of what prompted all of this. But I am often impressed by the topics that he brings forward and the conversations that we have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
They often happen at night when I'm tired and I'm getting ready to go to bed, and he'll come and just sit
the
down and
teenagers
talk.
just come to life at
And I
11
turn off the
o'clock at
TV
night,
and
so-
we have great conversations, sometimes too late at night, but they're treasured moments, right,
Yeah.
as they grow up.
Yeah.
And so when they present these arguments, what I love is there's so much conversation about critical thinking, right? Common Core was all about critical thinking. And then as it played out, we started to see it wasn't critical thinking. Because I look at curriculum for all over the state, right? I used to be on the House Education Committee. I think you know that. So I am still sort of an education curriculum nerd.
Yeah.
I study these things. And what the idea through Common Core of critical thinking is, we're going to tell you what to think and give you the means to fight for that perspective.
Yeah.
There isn't any kind of conversation that goes either
Teaching
way.
how to think, not what to think.
Right,
Just how-
and that happened at
That's what you want.
another school in Manchester, not Trinity, not Holy Family, with my older son, where for some reason in 7th grade the topic of abortion came up.
Yeah.
And instead of the teacher either moderating it between the kids or saying, this is really not appropriate for this age level, we're not going to have this conversation, because it wasn't science, it was just like homeroom, or they would have conversations.
Yeah.
She jumped in and started telling the boys they could not talk about this. They had no right to discuss it. She started raising her voice to them, saying it's not a baby, and the whole thing escalated to the point where he was actually really upset. And he can usually hold his own in an argument, but he was really upset about the way that this transpired. So it wasn't about critical thinking or having a debate or conversation. It was about putting her beliefs onto the kids, right? And that's not the Socratic method. That is, you debate respectfully with points, hopefully with some research, and either viewpoint is okay to discuss.
Examine it. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, and two thoughts on that. So, defining a terms is a big part of how do we think and how do we discuss. So to argue, Bishop Barron makes a good point. The really problem today is we don't argue. When I talk, we're arguing all the time. So the Latin word, it sounds snobby, but it's just helpful to know what words mean. It comes from a word meaning to make clear, to clarify. So we want to argue, and I want to understand the simple thing of what's the best way to make a pizza. I don't know. So, but to go back and forth, what law would be best? How do we deal with this problem, that problem? So when we're stuck in our own thoughts and our own echo chambers, you don't learn a lot, but you learn by listening to other people and talking to different people. So we should argue more, and that's good. And the second point is, so my own kids have a classical education. A warning: if you get your kids a classical education, they're going to come up with good arguments why they should be able to stay out late. This is an unjust law, or this is an unjust regime, and so be ready for that. So and that's helpful. It's what you want. So that habit of every day being in that, it's like being in a gym, you're a boxer, just training every day. I can how to listen and not trying to only pick on the weak points. So the parts we agree on, maybe we could start there. And what do you mean by the word freedom or whatever it may be? Let's agree on what the words. Otherwise, we really can't have a conversation if we're defining freedom in completely different ways. Then that's the point, I guess, to argue about. Let's figure that out. What does freedom mean? Is it doing whatever you want? Or the conversation goes from there.
And that's a lost art. And when you get back to the government conversation, right? The reason we're in the place that we're in right now is a lot of it has to do with social media, because having those arguments face to face, or those discussions that may turn to arguments face to face, they stay calm, collected, and respectful. Usually, I mean, you get some hotheads, right?
Sure.
I'm Irish. I may have been accused of that once or twice in my life, but you keep things respectful. When someone's hiding behind a keyboard, and often because I think I'm in a conversation with people sometimes online, and we're having a healthy debate, and then when it starts to go. They start to see that they're losing the debate. I'm a racist, I'm a bigot, I'm a whatever, right? And then they want to cancel you and go after you.
Right.
And that's how we've lost that ability to have a space where we can debate freely. And there's always consequences to your words. So you have to be careful what you say sometimes, because there are consequences to free speech. But there's also, we've gone the other way where there are consequences for not saying hateful things, just things that people don't like. Right? They're being branded in a different way, and that goes back to what is reality?
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. Say things, type things, or shout out things in cars that we might never say if there are consequences. Meaning, I just said something rude to a person.
Right.
I wouldn't do that. Hopefully, I wouldn't do that in person, or maybe by mistake, and I can apologize. So I'm not convinced that there's definitely it's a arena to have those conversations. But I think you make a good point that we say things that we wouldn't say, and it's very hard to have that back and forth. And to see that this is a human being who should be treated with respect. Right. I may disagree with everything you have to say,
right?
But you're more than your ideas, and that you have dignity and value, unique, unrepeatable in the world. So that's the most important thing about you. More than whatever things we disagree on. And it's a tough venue to have those dialogues. But it's tempting because it's very easy to interact, which we want. So there could be some exchange of ideas, but it's not the same as face-to-face combat.
It could be such a powerful tool for the positive.
Yeah,
if people behaved in a respectful way.
Yeah.
But if you said, not you, if a person said in a bar what they say online, there would be a social consequence. There would be
consequence.
punch to the jaw, and that would stop, and that person would change their behavior.
Yeah.
But when they're anonymous online, there are no consequences to their actions, right?
Yeah.
So I think in some ways social media could have, and maybe it still has the
it could
potential.
Be, sure. Maybe you can find a niche where people are really good at listening. So there's a rule that they like St. Thomas Aquinas in his heyday. They had the way they had public discussions, debates was that if Seamus makes a point about whatever the topic is, then the other person wants to respond. You're not allowed to respond until you first say, "Let me hear you right, Seamus. You're saying da 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 da," and Seamus has the authority to say, "Yeah, now you got me. Now you can respond," as opposed to I twisted his words or I'm using some hot button issues to make him look foolish. That's not a dialogue anymore. So that one rule would make a huge difference. Of you make a point. And I have to first say, okay, do I hear this correctly? And then you say, yeah, that's my point. So now you're free to agree or disagree, as opposed to just, picking on some little thing before you really understand the person. So
you may have just solved all the problems of marriages across this country with that one.
Well, I'll work on my own first, so yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
And Latin. You brought up Latin a little bit. So Latin is mandatory in your school from the day you walk in to the day you graduate.
So you take 5 years. So 5 out of the 6 years you're taking Latin. So what could be more useless, right? That's the object. Which objection? In most classes get it. When am I ever going to use algebra? What's the utility? Which is, it's a fair question to ask.
I researched this, but I'm going to let you take it because this is your thing.
Well, in the spirit of dialogue, I don't mind hearing what you have to say first.
Because someone questioned me on social media, and they were like, so why does he take Latin?
Yeah.
That's a useless language.
Yeah.
And I said, well, first, when we're watching things, he can figure out what a word is by the root if he doesn't know it, especially if we're watching like National Treasure or those fun shows that have some mystery in them. They tend to use Latin.
Right.
But also, when I researched a little bit, learning Latin actually changes the way that kids think, people think, and the way that they can form thoughts, conversations, and arguments.
Right.
There's a whole science behind Latin.
For sure, yeah. There's a grammar behind it. So you mentioned vocabulary. That's a great point. Again, words are the building blocks of thought. So if we don't know what a word means, you can't really form a thought. If I don't know what you mean by a word, I can't understand what you're trying to say. So, and so many English words have Latin roots. So, which is better than memorizing definitions. I think understanding a root word helps you understand a word in a much deeper way. Take the word education as a familiar example. The Latin roots are to lead out from inside. So that means Seamus has all this potential to see the truth and to act and to love the beautiful. So it's more like a seed that can grow into a 100-foot oak tree, as opposed to a student is kind of empty and we just fill them with all kinds of stuff, as opposed to respecting. You said there's a nature to things, and if a human person wants to be happy and flourish, there are just certain ways things are not good for us. Take bad air, as a physical example. So vocabulary is certainly part of that, and some of the evidence of that is in the SAT scores. Students who take any second language tend to do better than those who don't take a second language. And of all those who take a second language, those who study Latin do the best in the English part of things. But also grammar. It's amazing how many people will comment, so-and-so showed up in freshman year, even in law school showed up, and really can't explain the grammar of a sentence. I'm not talking about diagramming every single last word, which, but the basic guts of a sentence of, subject, verb, object, what's the subject, what's being said about the subject, that's your predicate. So in English, word order determines that. So Joe loves Susie, that's how you figure it out. In Latin, you could put those words in any order. What's the point? The point is you actually have to understand the word's function in a sentence. So I don't want to get too technical, but it helps us to understand basic English grammar, which is amazing how many of us take 12 years of grammar and really aren't that clear about, what's the difference between an active verb and an intransitive verb. So again, it sounds like geeky nerd stuff, but if you're trying to have a clear conversation, it helps to know how sentences work, how complete thoughts work.
All right, we're down to a minute. What's your favorite great book so far?
Probably Beowulf.
Beowulf?
Beowulf was good.
Cool. What's your favorite?
I could see that, yeah. Oh, boy, I can't pick. I'll take Plato's Apology. It's sort of the birth of philosophy. That's where you get the unexamined life is not worth living. It's better to suffer an injustice than commit an injustice. Socrates as the gadfly trying to wake us up through dialogue, through philosophy, yeah.
And if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of Holy Family Academy to get more information?
Sure, our website's out there, holyfamilyacademy.org. You can find everything out there, and call the school anytime, 644-7247.
All right.
And be available.
Well, thank you for being here, Mr. Gillis.
Thank you.
Good job, Seamus. And also, just let you know that the increase in the Children's Scholarship Fund, it went from 300% of the federal poverty level to 350, so more families are going to be able to access education freedom accounts. I want to thank our legislature for putting that through, and Governor Sununu for signing that bill. Take care, you guys. I'll see you next week, where my co-host will be Tammy Simmons-Garthwaite. Have a great week.